Hosted by Dr. George Gaitanos, Chief Scientific and Operating Officer at Chenot. This podcast explores what truly improves health and functionality, detoxification, nutrition, sleep, metabolic health, and more. Join Chenot experts and guests for clear, evidence-informed conversations with practical takeaways you can use today. Let's begin.
Hello and welcome. Today, we are exploring how our health is shaped not only by what we eat, but also by the wider environment in which we live. Moving beyond calories and willpower, we will look at the biology of hunger, satiety and metabolism, and how factors such as our lived environment, early life experiences, lifestyle, and daily habits can influence long-term health. To guide us through this, I'm joined by Dr. Federica Amati, medical scientist, clinical nutritionist, and public health advocate, specializing in nutrition, gut health, and disease prevention. She has spent more than 15 years researching and teaching the impact of nutrition, lifestyle medicine, and our lived environment on long-term health. Her work focuses on translating scientific evidence into practical, everyday choices. Dr. Federica is a senior lecturer and researcher at the Imperial College London and King's College London. She is also head nutritionist at Zoe and head of nutrition science at Well-Founded Health, where she works at the forefront of research, clinical practice, and public engagement. Let's begin. Dear Dr. Amati, welcome
George,
to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been really looking forward to this one.
Yeah. It's been a pleasure for us as well, and for me particularly. I know you for long. I know about your work and the things that you've been doing in across research, clinical nutrition, public health. So obviously, my first question is what originally drew you to the science of how and why we eat?
It's a great question. Originally, I was a public health scientist and then a medical scientist. My first degree we looked at endocrine pharmacology. So I was interested in understanding the body systems and how we could help people when it went wrong. And during my training in public health, I quite quickly became attracted to prevention. So I found that there were so many things we could do to actually just prevent people from having these problems in the first place, specifically metabolic conditions and diet-related chronic conditions. And so I decided to look a little bit more into what dietary patterns were actually causing this issue. And I sat in a lecture. Do you know Professor Elio Riboli?
I've heard of.
Yeah, so he's a brilliant scientist, and he was one of the principal investigators for EPIC, which is a huge cohort trial looking at European diets and cancer. And he was presenting some of his findings, and I was astonished that he was talking about how processed red meat and red meat consumption correlated with colorectal cancer risk, and in a kind of dose response way. And I was just sitting, I was like, oh my goodness, we could just let people know this and it would help them reduce their risk potentially, right? So we didn't understand the mechanisms yet, but that's what really was one of the moments where my interest was really sparked. I wanted to find out more. I wanted to train in nutrition as well. And then on a personal note, my father passed away from colorectal cancer, and I saw the effects that a disease like that could have. And it got me thinking, what could he have done to actually prevent getting the cancer and to also have a better quality of life during treatment? So there's a sort of, I came to nutrition both through my professional training and through my personal experiences. And I still, to this day, I think it's the most powerful tool we have when it comes to modifying health, reducing risk, and improving quality of life.
In your everyday work with people, despite we have all these fantastic advances in nutrition science, but in the everyday work you do you find people being more confused than ever?
Yes.
I mean, so much information there. What works for? Do we have things that we know that work? Because sometimes I think we are 8 billion people on this planet and we have 8 billion diets, right?
It's interesting. We have 8 billion people, 8 billion diets, each having around 21 meals every week, right? So it's like a lot of different choices, plus snacking, which 90% of people have snacks too.
Yes.
And I think the confusion is probably at peak right now. It might still go up, but there's so many opinions in nutrition. I think that the issue with nutrition science is because everybody eats, a lot of people think that makes them an expert.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of opinions. I think actually nutrition science is pretty coherent. So when you look at the evidence base for nutrition, what works, what doesn't work, what's helpful, what isn't helpful, and the general dietary patterns that support health, just the nutrition scientists, we're not arguing about it. Like we all agree. I think that the confusion and the disagreement comes from outside of the science. It comes from influencers. It comes from sometimes, unfortunately, it comes from medical colleagues who are in another specialty and they bring that specialty into public health advice. So there's a real mixture, and everyone, and unfortunately, George, I'm not a cynical person, but there's a lot of money to be made. And so people will often bring their opinions to create a product and then sell it to an audience. And because we eat every day, and as we said, there's lots of opportunities for people to purchase products every day, there's this huge market that is just making the most of the confusion. So I think one of the problems is that the confusion drives profit. So
I mean, everything is transactional, right? Well, what can we do about it?
Well, I think we can do quite a lot about it. Like what you guys do at Chenot, I respect a lot because you're very evidence-based. So you're evidence-led, you're evidence-based, and you are doing something that you've collected your own data on, and you're analyzing the data, and you're seeing that you have a positive impact. So if more people and more clinicians and more places let Chenot that welcome people to improve their health take an evidence-based approach, then the confusion will die down, right? Because if I send one of my patients to you, the principles that you have agree with the principles I communicate, and therefore there's cohesion.
Yes.
So I think having an evidence-based approach is important. And I also think it's important for the public to be aware that they should question what the advice is, and they should question the professional and ask them, actually, what are your credentials to give me nutrition advice? And if somebody is very sort of aggressive with that, I'd like, oh, why would you ask that question? That's a red flag. If you would never go to, you would never ask an electrician to fix your plumbing, would you? So when you need to repair your boiler at home, you will call a plumber and say, can you help me? If an electrician tries to fix your boiler, you say, hang on a minute, aren't you an electrician? Why are you trying to fix my plumbing? And so it's the same thing. Like when we approach health, we have to make sure that people we're taking advice from, whether it's a clinician that we're seeing face to face or online. Okay, so when we're consuming information online, where is it coming from? What is that person's training to be communicating this advice? And there's quite a lot of work now that myself and some of my colleagues are doing to help people spot misinformation. Mm-hmm. So there's some ways that you can really start to tell that something probably isn't very evidence-based. And I think that's a new skill that we need to teach students. I teach my medical students this skill as well, so that they can actually take it into their work and for themselves and their patients be able to tell what's reliable, scientific, evidence-based, and what's actually probably not.
Do you think we have a definition of what is a healthy diet?
Yeah, I do.
And we can put this in your greater, understanding of what it means to be healthy, having a healthy diet. Because certainly with food, you molecules, you give information to the body, right? So, absolutely. So what makes a healthy diet?
A diet which is providing your body with the correct stimulus and information, as you put it, to allow your systems to optimally function. And also, a very important role for a healthy diet is that it allows us to connect socially. So it's always been, throughout our evolution, it's been a point of social connection. And it's also something that brings us joy. So we have evolved to enjoy the taste of food so that we would seek it. And so that
Mm-hmm.
pleasure of food is a big part of what a healthy diet should be. If you eat a
Mm-hmm.
diet that ticks all the boxes in terms of nutrients, but it's disgusting or you don't enjoy it, then you're missing a piece of what a healthy diet should look like. Um, and in terms of what dietary pattern has been found to be healthy across hundreds of studies with all sorts of populations, different age groups, different health outcomes, name it, both as primary prevention and secondary prevention, and in some trials, even tertiary prevention. Okay, so like quality of life is the Mediterranean diet. There's no other diet that has the same amount of scientific rigor, clear understanding. We know how to measure it. We know how to ask people about it. We know which factors in the diet make it so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's not hard. Now, it's not to say that you can't personalize the Mediterranean diet. So if you're someone who, for example, doesn't eat fish, how do we change the diet so that you still have the omega-3 fatty acid content and the iodine, but from other sources? So you can still personalize, and you can absolutely change the Mediterranean dietary principles to suit any region of the world. So I think often people get a little bit unstuck with the Mediterranean diet because they think it means you have to have tomatoes and basil and you have to have, Spanish or Italian food. It's not the case. The Mediterranean dietary principles can be translated to any part of the world, and that work has been done before. So for me, and something I'm very passionate about, and I have worked with, research groups and the Italian embassy, for example, to explain the modern Mediterranean diet. So these principles that translate to any kind of cuisine. And it's just clear to me that that is the most well understood and best dietary pattern.
This is very interesting because my next question would be if there is a genetic component to what is a healthy diet. So, for example, I am Greek,
Mm-hmm.
you are Italian. What is my relationship with food from Japan, for example, or from another country? So, is there a genetic component into this? I like the idea of translating the Mediterranean
Yes.
diet into. I think this is lovely and very well said. But is there a genetic component? Should I be eating soya every day, for example, because I like it?
Yeah.
Being Greek.
Yeah, it's a good idea. So it's a good question. So I think the idea of translating the Mediterranean principles to different regions incorporates some of this question around genetic factors, or at least epigenetic factors that might contribute to how we interact with the food we eat. So a great example is tofu and soy-based products. They are largely consumed in the sort of eastern part of the world. So does it make sense that someone like us from the Mediterranean region eats it every day? Is that what our ancestors is that what we've evolved with? Is that what's going to help us? So I think the answer, I don't think we have the exact answer as to whether it's unhelpful or helpful. When you do intervention studies looking at specific food groups, like soy-based products, for example, they do have a beneficial effect across different populations from different parts of the world. So there's quite a lot of soy interventions for perimenopausal women, and they've been done in the US, in the UK, in Europe. So I don't think that our epigenetic traits or genetic traits are so inflexible as to not
Mhm.
adapt to different foods. I think the principles that the Mediterranean diet brings are the actual foundation, and then how that shows up in different foods, different ingredients. I think that's where you can personalize it though. So if, for example, I love tofu. I eat it quite regularly not from Italy. It's because I live in London, right? And so I've been
Right.
exposed to it. I enjoy it. Um, and I think there's a benefit for me in my diet, I feel, but I don't, so it's not as strict as it has to be your ancestral diet, but it does mean that if you prefer to eat foods from your original region, then you can adapt these principles to incorporate all sorts of cuisines. Um, so it's an interesting question. I don't think we have data that shows that a specific type of ingredient is only going to benefit one population. There was a piece of research published a couple of months ago where they did what they called a green Mediterranean diet. And it was, so it had more tofu, soy products, and more like seaweeds and greens that are typically found in Japanese cooking. And it was for dementia and Alzheimer's. And in that study, that particular Mediterranean type diet that had more soy and more greens and green tea had a really protective effect in this cohort for dementia risk. So there's different ways you can look at it and try to unpick what you'd prefer to do. But I think, as you know, most of us don't actually adhere to the principles. So start with the principles and then you can play around with the individual ingredients.
Yeah, we mentioned before, I mean, you mentioned nicely, I mean, in addition to what you have on your plate, taste, presentation is important. How important is not to eat alone? Because you can have the best sort of mixture of molecules on your plate. It's one thing you eat alone, and I've seen a lot of people eating alone in front of a TV. I think, me being Mediterranean, I like to have people around the table. I mean, food is something very social, right? I mean, you share, So we have studies on this tell us that the effect of the same ingredients just are different, reacting different in the body or not.
Yes, we have studies on conviviality. So if you look at the principles of Mediterranean diet, one of the factors is conviviality. So sharing meals is actually one of the elements. And the countries, so it's this is an interesting one because you can't really do an RCT on this because it's a long-term effect. But when you do population studies, epidemiological studies, and you segment the amount of time people spend eating together, so you can stratify by people who spend a lot of time eating with friends and loved ones and those who spend very little time. There's this real relationship between conviviality, sharing meals, and better health outcomes. And there was a striking analysis that looked at countries. So it looked at country level data of like average time spent eating together at a table, right? So eating together doesn't mean walking to the bus stop, eating crisps, sitting down at a table. And there's a relationship between the amount of time spent eating together and just better health outcomes, better mental health. So we have the data on mental health outcomes is really strong. So there's this there is this effect of sharing food, which allows people to almost to align. So like the energy aligns when you're sharing a meal with somebody. It's a very safe space for your brain if you're sharing a meal with someone. So it reduces stress, and that you can see in the short term. So if you there are studies where you give a person the same meal either by themselves or with someone that they like and they can have a chat with, and cortisol levels are different. So that your stress response is different if you're sharing a meal. And as you know, elevated cortisol alters the way you absorb food, your digestion.
Yeah.
So actually the almost the nutritional value of the meal changes if you're sharing it with someone. And I think we're seeing this also in eating behaviors in children. So children are now, some of them are growing up not sharing meals with their parents or with
That's why I'm asking you the question, because I speak to a lot of people in my work. And I see that they don't eat together as a family. Even Sunday lunch is gone, the Sunday meal that we used to all have together as a family. It's just not there. And I believe that it does eventually make a big impact.
It does, especially if it's over so if it's a repeated missed opportunity.
Yes.
I actually often say, George, that conviviality is the missing biohack no one's talking about. Like if you want to improve your health, just try sitting down with someone you actually like. At least, once a week is a really low bar.
Yeah.
I would say at least once a day, one of your meals, breakfast, lunch, dinner, at least one of them. Sit down with someone you like and talk to them and have a conversation about anything. Like have a conversation. It's such an important social anchor. And I think I'm very passionate about this because when you think about how we've evolved as a species, our day used to revolve around seeking food, hunting food, gathering food, collecting it back to our tribe, preparing the food, sharing the food, eating the food, and then painting about the food on our cave walls. Like our entire lives, basically, used to revolve around the importance of nourishment because it's so fundamental to our survival. Now, many thousands of years later, of course, we do lots of other things and we've evolved and there's lots going on. But we're now so far removed from that in quite evolutionarily a short space of time. Yeah. We've gone from really, really relishing what part of food plays in our lives to some people just drinking their lunch from a plastic bottle and
Yeah.
at their desk or on the tube. And that is just not how our bodies are set up to thrive and to actually make the most of the food we eat. And when we take the opportunity to actually prepare our food and then sit down, and you talked about how it looks, actually interacting with the ingredients, seeing them, smelling them, tasting them, that's how the entire cephalic part of our appetite regulation and hunger regulation needs those stimuli to work properly. So for me, the worst impact of this like convenience is king rhetoric, that food needs to be quick and convenient and painless and you just don't need to sit down, is that we're really missing a trick in terms of giving our bodies the information it needs about what food we have available and what's coming. So it's a real shame. And I like to challenge anyone who's accepted this new way of everything just needs to be convenient and you shouldn't be wasting time on food. I really disagree with that. It's a fundamental part of being human.
Yeah, I mean, the process of preparing it is very, very important. And we always say non-processed food, and all we eat, as you said, in plastic bottles, ready-made food, you don't even know where it comes from. Yeah. So you mentioned about hunger now. That's interesting you said about it. And you have challenged often the idea that hunger is about willpower. Is it?
No. So
So
I
what's the
think
biological reality that, most people are missing?
yeah, I think, we haven't had a failure of willpower as a species in the past 100 years. So there's this rhetoric that I hope it's becoming less prevalent now, but certainly for the past 50 years or 60 years, there's this rhetoric that if you put on weight, if you've got a bigger body and you have more fat mass, it's your fault. It's because you've eaten too much. You just haven't gone to the gym enough, and it's basically down to you. Now we live in a world where 60% of adults in a lot of countries, a lot of high-income countries, are overweight or obese.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the majority, vast majority, right? And we're also seeing an increase in children. And the majority of adults and children aren't lacking willpower. That's not what's happening. So our hunger and our satiety signaling is very tightly regulated. We have a beautiful system in place with dozens of peptides from our gut, from our fat tissue, that all interact and communicate with our brain, specifically the hypothalamus, which is really responsible for changing our behavior and driving that reward seeking, like food seeking behavior. We also have, when you look at the entire sort of gambit of these hormones, there's only a couple that are responsible for hunger. Okay, so ghrelin will make you hungry, but the others are all there to help you feel satiated. What that tells us is that our system is actually set up to help us feel satiated from our food most of the time. So even though ghrelin is a very strong signal, our body is actually trying to help us feel pretty good. If we eat the right foods, these signals will help us to feel satiated. Now, here's a really important difference between satiation and fullness. You can feel full it's a temporary feeling when you've just ingested food and your stretch receptors are activated in your stomach. But satiation lasts for many hours. So a healthy diet will help you with your satiety. You will actually feel good. You won't just feel full for half an hour. You'll feel like you've eaten enough, you're nourished. And the way this works is that we have these nutrient sensing enteroendocrine cells throughout our gut that are set up to sense the appropriate nutrients and send messengers like GLP-1, GIP, PYY, all these lovely peptides that are designed to go to our brain and say, hey, we've got more nutrients coming. We are going to make the most of these and we're good. So when we start to understand the setup, the physiology of hunger and the physiology of satiety, actually, it's amazing because what you realize is that if you work with your biology and you feed it the right foods, you will feel good. You won't be hungry all the time. So where has it gone wrong? Like, why, if we have such an elegant system, why is it that so many people struggle so much, right? And
Yeah.
it really is down to our obesogenic environment. So we are surrounded by food that doesn't contain the adequate nutrients to actually stimulate these nutrient sensing cells to produce these hormones, right? And so we are eating an abundance of calories that are not nutritious and they don't have any fiber in them or very little. And so despite the fact we're consuming lots of energy, the nutrient density of these foods is so poor that it is not allowing our bodies to actually send these satiety signals. This is really important also because the energy in, energy out, all you need is calories conversation doesn't take this into account. And so whilst I'm not arguing with physics, of course, calories are important. But if you just focus on caloric intake, you don't explain why people feel hungry despite adequate caloric intake. It's not just the calories. So if you imagine somebody who drives to work, sits at a desk all day, so physically their body is not able to expense as much energy as perhaps we should. They are also eating foods that are high in calories, high in saturated fats, possibly high in refined carbohydrates and sugars, contain additives which interrupt and interact with the gut microbiome.
Mm-hmm.
Then our liver is still going to be sorting out the refined carbohydrates and the fats. It still has to put them somewhere. So you then have a very efficient system. Hopefully, while people are still insulin sensitive, this excess energy is going to be stored as fat. But the nutrient sensing cells in the small intestine and in the colon are not receiving any information to say, actually, we've got nutrients. And so they're not sending GLP-1 and PYY and GIP to the brain. That's just the start. Then so already you have the system that's not balanced because even though you have excess energy, the satiation is not there.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you get to the point where there is so much excess fat stored that another signal that usually helps us stay at a homeostatic point. So our body, we know, George, both of us love homeostasis. And our body loves homeostasis. It's like set up to try and achieve homeostasis at all times.
Yeah,
So
safety for the body.
Safety, stability, right? And the homeostatic weight set point is what our body tries to keep. It tries to keep us around the same weight. And there's really cool mechanisms of how it does that. There are special cells in the bones of your legs that sense how much pressure there is. So if you walk and you spend time standing up, there's more feedback to your brain of how much weight there is. That's one of the systems. The other system that's really important is leptin. So your fat cells, as they store more fat, they release leptin, which is a hormone that is designed to tell your brain, hey, we've got good energy storage. Like, it helps us to reduce hunger. So if you increase your energy storage, it decreases your hunger. And that's how our body then balances how much fat we have. So if you go on holiday for a couple of weeks and you lie on a beach and you eat lots of nice food, you might store a bit more fat. your leptin will signal to your brain, hey, we've got a bit more fat than usual, and it will ramp up your metabolic rate. It will reduce your hunger, and within a couple of weeks, you've lost that extra fat. Okay, so it's very clever. However, if you continue to drive excess fat storage, what can happen is that your brain becomes resistant to the leptin. So that leptin signaling is now still saying to your brain, hey, we've got loads of fat storage, like let's dial down the hunger, and your brain's not receiving that signal anymore. It's called leptin resistance. And this is a real hallmark in many people who suffer with obesity, excess fat mass, and who have incredible hunger. So this is where this, again, idea of willpower doesn't stick, because these individuals, despite having excess fat mass, the brain is genuinely starving. Like, they're not getting the fullness signaling. Ghrelin is still high, so ghrelin is still doing its job. And so they are genuinely hungry, and it's not about willpower. So we have to appreciate that entire system, how it's set up. If we can work with it, it will help us to achieve a healthy weight and stay at that healthy weight. Mm-hmm. But our current environment is stacked against success. And that's why the majority of people are failing, not individually, but because the system is set up to not serve our biology.
Yeah, is not supporting them. So you create this food addiction, if I may say. How important is microbiome? How much can influence appetite, metabolism, energy production, regulation?
Lots. So there's some fascinating research that's coming out of the States and looking at how gut microbiome composition changes the amount of essentially energy absorbed from a meal. So there was a very elegant trial done in a lab. So, very controlled, measuring everything. And they fed one arm of the trial, the participants were fed a microbiome friendly diet. And the second arm were fed exactly the same macronutrient content, but less microbiome friendly. So essentially less fibre, less diversity of fibres. And the group that had the microbiome friendly version, they ended up losing weight. And when they measured, urine output, they measured like all the energy in, energy out. They realized that the gut microbiome was using some of the energy from the food, specifically the fibers and the polyphenols and some of the fats, to feed its own growth. So the gut microbes are making use of the food we feed them for their own population. And as a byproduct of that, they are actually reducing any excess energy from our diet being used by our bodies and stored as fat. So there's starting to be some really tightly controlled trials like this one that show us how the same diet, looking at like micronutrient content, if it's geared towards supporting our gut microbiome, has better metabolic health outcomes for us. It's important to note as well that the gut microbes make the short-chain fatty acids that are needed for our nutrient-sensing enteroendocrine cells to make these hormones. So my favorite cell is called the L cell. They sit in our gut and they sense short-chain fatty acids. And when there's enough short-chain fatty acids, they use that as their fuel to create GLP-1 and PYY, for example. So if our gut microbes are being fed enough fibers to make enough short-chain fatty acids, you see a direct relationship with the satiety of that individual and how they seek food-seeking behaviors. Another really interesting part of the gut microbiome story is that there is something known as gut microbiome mediated hunger. So we have hedonic hunger, which is very sort of directed by our food preferences, food advertising, cultural norms, and all these kinds of things. You have homeostatic hunger, which is your body saying, hey, we need more energy, go and eat some food. And then gut microbiome derived hunger, which seems to have a completely different role and actually helps with driving food preference. So gut microbes are essentially just using us as a vessel, and they just want to survive, right? They just want to live.
Yeah.
And what happens is populations of microbes, as they grow, they send they change messaging to our brain via the vagus nerve to encourage us to eat the foods that are going to keep them alive. So it's really funny. I find it funny because it's this idea of like there's a group of microbes in your gut that love blueberries. They really love the fibers in the blueberries. They love the anthocyanins, and they will influence your decision making, and they will basically be like, don't forget your blueberries, so that they can survive. So the gut microbiome has an effect on how efficient our energy metabolism is. It has an effect on how well the satiety signaling in our gut. That's a huge effect. If we don't feed our gut fiber, then the colonic part of satiety signaling can't function at all.
Yeah.
And it has this like really interesting effect on actual hunger, like what we choose to eat.
Let's stay to the gut microbiome, because I mean microbiome is everywhere in our body. But
Yeah, we're sticking to gut.
Yeah, let's stay to the gut. And often people do these tests on microbiome. Do they tell us something? Because I've seen people with what is defined as good microbiome, and they're still having a lot of issues. And I have seen and I've met a lot of people with what we will say not favorable microbiome, and they are full of energy, they feel fantastic. So is there value in these tests?
I think the problem is that we don't have a global standardized way of analyzing what's going. First of all, actually, let's take a step back. A lot of these gut microbiome tests use quite old techniques in terms of the genetic analysis, right? So some of these are 16S tests, which doesn't give you a lot of information about what genes are present. The majority of them are 16S.
Yeah, but now we have evolved. I mean, a lot, no?
Some of them have do full metagenomics. A couple still use PCR. So there isn't. Not everyone's using the same tools to even measure it. And then the analysis itself of the measurement. Some people just report on what strains are in there, but without any idea of like the overall balance of the ecosystem. I think we have to remember that the gut works as an ecosystem. It's a gut microbiome. So, for example, a lot of people come to me and say, "Oh my gosh, they've identified E. coli in my gut." I'm like,
"Yeah,
that's fine, unless you have an E. coli infection from a strain that is known to be harmful, right?" So we have to. The problem with most gut tests is that they don't have this level of analysis and interpretation. Now, of course, I'm part of the research group at Zoe who developed the gut microbiome ranking score, which is relevant to health outcomes. So the way we've ranked gut microbiome composition is by identifying specific strain level information through full metagenomic transcription and grouping them in a way that's functional to the ecosystem with health outcomes like cardiovascular disease risk, visceral fat accumulation, blood pressure. So these are all relevant.
This will be relationships, like it will not be cause and effect.
So we've actually done longitudinal, so we can see cause and effect. So we've looked at longitudinal dietary interventions that change the gut microbiome composition and the relevant health outcomes. Yeah. So we do have that.
Yes, because my point, to what I ask you, is that we're looking at the different species.
Yeah.
But we often, which is microbiota, as opposed to microbiome, which is all about functionality. So putting all together, how do they function? And still, we cannot answer that question. Is that right?
I would say that you're right in the sense that we're still at the beginning of getting to a place where we actually understand what a healthy gut microbiota composition looks like. The next step is the gut microbiome, to your point. So what is the actual functionality? But not just, some tests will tell you how much butyrate you have in a sample.
Yeah.
That's fine. But butyrate in one sample doesn't tell me how much potential butyrate you could produce. It might just tell me that you had a good diet yesterday. So there's a lot of, so I would say like there's a lot of question marks still for gut microbiome testing. The one we do at Zoe is the only one that I've seen is relevant to clinical health outcomes. And there's still space for the functional piece. So I always say to my patients, don't worry too much about it. it's useful if it's something you're going to repeat and see movement on. But the majority of the ones that are commercially available are not even analyzed in a way that's useful. So it's like, it's not something I would recommend widely. Um, and I always big pinch of salt with the analyses.
Yeah, yeah. But also it tells us that variety of food always helps.
Always, yeah.
Fiber diversity. So usually when people ask me what to eat and everything, I said eat of everything. I mean, that's a safe way to go, right?
Definitely. Diversity is key. So, people always often ask about one thing. They'll say, "Oh, I want to lower my cholesterol. So how do I get more beta glucan?" And I'm like, don't just get more beta glucan. Just eat more fiber, eat more whole grains, add some nuts and seeds to your diet. Try to eat some legumes and pulses every day. Like, there is so much that we're missing from our plates. Our diversity of foods has decreased drastically over the past 100 years. So actually seek out diversity as the number one thing that will help improve your health, which is why I think some of the diets that are very popular online now, George, like paleo, ketogenic, carnivore, they're so restrictive. And you're cutting out masses of food groups that are so important for our health. And again, I think this is a real problem and it causes so much harm. So diversity is king.
I agree with that. I want to have your take on protein, because there's so much talk about protein. We are bombarded with, it's a new grail now. I mean, everybody talks about protein. Where's my protein? I don't need protein. I lose muscle mass. Supplements, you go to the supermarket, oh my God, full of, bars with protein. And, they name now, candies as protein bars and all these things. So what's your... Tell us a little bit about this. I think it would be interesting.
Many thoughts on this. Yeah, protein ice cream. Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. Unfortunately, the protein craze is entirely led by food manufacturer profits. So adding protein to foods is extremely cheap. Whey protein is a byproduct of cheese manufacturing. It's so cheap. It's like, you can add it to anything and it'll give you the high protein stamp on the front of your packet. And unfortunately, shoppers will pay extra money for that high protein. So if you have the same exact food, you might have breakfast cereal. The breakfast cereal with a high protein stamp on the front, even though it's the same thing, people will pay like 20, 40% more. Okay. So there's masses of money to be made. Now, what is the truth about protein in our culture? If we look at protein deficiency in high income countries, it is not a problem. It is not a thing. That people are not lining up in hospitals or dietitians' offices because they are protein deficient. It's just non-existent. The only patient groups that really suffer with this are cancer patients, cancer cachexia, patients who have very severe burns, so their immune system and their much higher requirements for protein. And of course, patients who have anorexia, whether it's anorexia nervosa or anorexia associated with aging or with dementia. So those are the groups who need to be extra careful about their protein intake. But as an average, adults in the UK, the US, and Europe tend to get around 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight every day, which is well above
from the
diet alone without supplementation. So this is well above what's required to maintain health, which is the 0.87 grams per kilograms. Yeah. There is some debate around like modern lifestyles and actually whether the 0.87 is too low. And that it depends on what data you look at. Because if you look at Professor Valtalongo's data and some of Dan Buettner's Blue Zones data, lower protein consumption is better for longevity. So actually, we don't need to worry. Other data from more sort of sports nutritional, musculoskeletal health points of view, like Professor Stuart Phillips is one of the names that comes to mind as leading a lot of this research, says that actually 1 to 1.2 grams per kilograms of body weight is better for functional musculoskeletal health. Regardless, whichever one you pick, we're all getting that. So, okay, so we're done. We're good. Now, there's this concern that if we don't get 30 grams of protein at every meal, our muscles are going to melt. That is just not true. So, first of all, our protein anabolic window is about 36 hours. So, as long as you're getting adequate protein throughout your day, you'll be fine. If you lower your protein intake for a week, your body's fine. Like, it's not a problem. If you chronically lower your protein intake, then your metabolism will adjust and it will start to maybe like reduce the amount of new muscle tissue built. But I want to be super clear here. The biggest lever to maintain muscle mass and the biggest lever to grow muscle mass, lean mass, is not protein. It is movement. So if you want to grow your muscle or maintain muscle, you have to incorporate resistance training into your daily, weekly routine. If you just eat protein, but you are not doing any form of resistance training, whether that is a push-up or elastic bands or weights, there isn't like one perfect way to do it. It can be Pilates, lots of ways to do resistance training. But if you're not doing any of that, the protein alone is not going to help your muscles. So I think there's this real.
So you need to provide the signal, which is the exercise, yeah, and then you need to take the fuel to build on.
Exactly. Yes.
Yes.
It doesn't work otherwise. So, and there's very strong research, very strong evidence that has been repeated several times now that shows that even in athletes, so even in those who are really trying to increase their muscle mass considerably, the ceiling at which our bodies are able to do anything with protein is 1.6 grams per kilograms of body weight. Above that, the protein isn't going to have any further effect. Then it becomes exercise alone. So like above that level, if you want to grow any more, it's just all dependent on what your physiological ability to do more of that is. And so when I see influencers, and it's always influencers, and it's never someone who's done any actual research on protein intake, they say like it's a minimum of 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. Otherwise, you're going to lose your bones and you're going to lose your muscles. That is not evidence-based at all, like zero. So there's a lot of myths about protein. I think the quantity myth is huge. So how much we need. 96% of us don't get enough fibre every day. That's a real crisis. 96% is a lot. Whereas when we look at protein deficiency, not a thing. So that's a big myth. And the other big myth is this idea that animal protein is somehow incredibly superior to plant protein. And so you have to have animal protein for muscle synthesis. Not true. So all plants contain amino acids. You have to consider how you're pairing your plants if you want to have optimal amino acid profile. But all plants contain all essential amino acids. So that's another huge myth. And it's like really, once people realize that eating doesn't have to be so rigid about protein,
Yes,
and actually if you're eating a variety of foods,
variety is the key here.
You'll get what you need.
Yeah.
And then do the exercise. If you want to increase your lean muscle mass, like you've got to do the work.
Absolutely, yes. But we are living in a society which is not encouraging this. Everything becomes automated, convenience.
Yeah.
Even when you go to the supermarket, you see how the shelves are built up with all these supplements and
I know.
and sugary stuff. And that's a very big problem.
Yes. And I think the first step is when you start to see this, when you start to realize that these products are created for profit, they're not created to help your health.
Yeah.
Then you start to say, hang on, what are the things I actually need to do to improve my health? And they're mostly free and they're mostly available to us without any branding or packaging, right? Sleeping well at night, waking up in the morning and getting some exposure to sunlight in the morning.
Now you mentioned this, how important is timing to a diet?
So that's
With your circadian kind of rhythmicity thing.
Yeah, so chronobiology. It's actually very important. So what we do know now is that most, especially younger adults, right, they have this real increase in insulin sensitivity in the morning. It starts to wane with age. But so when we think about like the 24-hour clock, there are rhythms that happen in our bodies from a hormone perspective, from a gut perspective, and also from our activity perspective. So for most of us, we are more active in the morning, and then as the day wears on, we tend to become less active. So there's this real, when you map them all out, there's this real wave of activity, of hormones, of everything. And when we work with that chronobiology, so when we work with our clock, we are then providing it with the right tools to function efficiently. So again, to your point, what you were saying earlier, the external stimulus is usually, the biggest one is sunlight. So we have our internal clock is set when we're exposed to light. And that sets off a series of cascades that affects our sleep that night. When we think about food timing is the second biggest stimulus after light. And the third one is movement. So our body doesn't know what's happening. Our pineal gland with its clock, it's like, it can't see. So it relies on external stimulus to understand where we're at in the sort of 24-hour, or it's actually 23.9-hour clock. And so when you think about having breakfast at the same time every day, for example, and having dinner at the same time every day sends a very clear signal to our bodies. This is the first meal of the day. Nutrients are going to be available now. And then when we make sure that we have dinner around the same time every night, every evening, and it's far enough away from our sleep time, it signals our body like, okay, last meal of the day, and sleep is uninterrupted by digestive process. So actually, the timing of what we do, I know it sounds boring because I love routine, but for some people it's like, oh God, it's so like routine focused, but it is hugely helpful for our bodies to know what to expect when, because actually all those hormones and all those systems then cascade to support our health. So another example is like gut motility. Gut motility switches on in the morning when our cortisol rises, and it has this initial, okay, we've got to get back up and we're going to start moving food along because we're expecting food. It's daytime. If you have your breakfast, that will stimulate the gastrocolic reflex, will give it another stimulus. It's like, okay, let's go, more gut motility. And that's another important signal to the gut. Okay, it's action time. We're absorbing food, we're digesting, we're doing things. And you see this mapped also in the gut microbiome. Species that thrive at nighttime are those that don't like too much food passing through, like Akkermansia. And then the ones who thrive in the daytime are your lactobacilli, your bifidobacteria. They love to eat and ferment food.
So also your microbiota has timing.
It changes, yes.
Yeah, it changes.
Your microbiome, yeah. So there's a real synchronicity when you look at all the systems. There's synchronicity across the entire body, and if you're working with it, giving it the right signals at the right time, you have this real regularity. So if you're someone who has a very regular sleep and wake time, it doesn't matter if you don't set an alarm, because you will wake up at that time when you've been waking up regularly. And you see this, we know a lot of this science comes from people who don't have synchronicity. So people who work night shifts, for example, but they're not regular night shifts, they have to change a lot. Those are people who, across the board, tend to suffer much more with metabolic disease. And it's this lack of synchronicity which really messes up how your hormones are functioning and how your body is able to utilize what it needs. And the stress that in response to that. We also see it with people who have frequent flying, who have a jet lag event several times a year. So it's something that we have a lot of data on. And chrononutrition, so chronobiology is the entire system, but chrononutrition specifically offers us lots of insights to how we can support our bodies just by changing the timing of what we eat. So one of the trials we ran was called the Big If study. And we asked 40,000 people to just change the time of when they ate. They didn't change anything about their diets. They just changed the timing. And they observed a 10-hour eating window. And so everyone had to finish eating by 9 p.m. And the improvements in mood, in energy, waist circumference, and they hadn't changed anything else about their diet, just working with the biology. We are diurnal animals, George. We
So
awake
if
in the day,
yes,
we eat in the day, we sleep at night, we don't eat at night.
we don't eat at night. I agree. So coming to timing again, I want to little expand on intermittent fasting because a lot of people skip breakfast, for example. That
Yes.
you mentioned how important it is and how good it is for the certain bacteria. So what is your opinion?
Yeah.
When we should be doing this window of not eating, and is it necessary? I know there's a lot of data telling us, stay out
Yeah.
of food for a while. It does help the body activate autophagy and all these mechanisms, but should we skip breakfast?
The first answer is doesn't matter what time your breakfast is, but try and make it regular. So if you don't want to have breakfast at 7
Brunch,
a.m.,
for example, brunch, I
yeah,
mean,
11, if you have, I would say like breakfast would be usually before 1 p.m. because at least based on the average data, the cortisol increase, insulin sensitivity, and insulin secretion really peaks in the first half of the day. And so if you want to make the most of that sensitivity, you want to have your first meal somewhere before 1.
okay.
It doesn't matter if it's at 11 and it's savory and not, like that's not what breakfast means. Breakfast literally means breaking your fast. So
Yes,
a lot of people say to me, I skip breakfast. I just eat at 11. I was like, okay, so your breakfast is at 11.
yes,
You
yes, you're
haven't
right.
skipped it. Yeah. Now, but there is interesting data looking at timing. So in terms of fasting, the evidence shows us that if you have a 12 to 14 hour fasting window overnight, that is definitely helpful. There is no shadow of a doubt. The intermittent fasting studies where they've stretched that fasting further, but this isn't fast mimicking. So fast mimicking is different. Okay, we're going to come back to that. But those who have maybe like a 6 hour eating window, the benefits aren't that impressive. So like they don't seem to improve things much more than just changing your diet in other ways. So there've been studies which have compared intermittent fasting with improved dietary quality, like Mediterranean diet, intermittent fasting with caloric restriction, and certainly for weight loss and metabolic health, it doesn't seem to do much difference. So some people find that for them, if they're trying to lose weight, just reducing their eating window is the best tool. That's the best way for them because it's just a yes or no, you're eating or not. So if that's a modality that works for you and your goal is to reduce food intake, then fine. But it doesn't have a magical power beyond the 12 to 14 hour fasting window overnight.
So the 16/8, a lot of people are using.
I mean,
Do you think also the fasting window changes with age?
yeah,
Like,
so what I do think is interesting is it seems that changing your fasting window earlier, your eating window earlier in the day, is actually probably better for us. So we're best off starting our day earlier and our eating earlier and then finishing our eating earlier as opposed to pushing it back. So some people say, oh, I don't eat anything until 1 p.m. and my last meal is like 9, 10 p.m. This all depends on what time you go to sleep. Okay, so that's important. But if you're the closer we push our last meal to bedtime, the less favorable it is for our metabolic health. So if you're someone who goes to bed every day, because it's your life, midnight to 1 a.m. in the morning, then that's okay for you to have your dinner at 9. But if you're someone who's going to bed at 11, which most people go to bed between 10 and 11, then 9 is too late. So you have to think about the entire day and then find the window that works for you, relevant to your sleep as well, and keep it consistent. So like my favorite question is, like, well, people in Spain, when I go on holiday in Spain, everyone's having dinner at 10. I'm like, Sure, but they're going to bed much later. They're waking up later. It's a different climate. Like it's not like they eat late and then go straight to sleep.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
have to bear in mind what the day looks like.
Yeah. Also
And
the heat. I mean, if you are you mentioned Spain, Greece, south of Italy, people go out to dinner at 10.
yeah, and it's hot in the
It's
day. So
hot. Exactly. I mean,
they're
it's
waking up, having breakfast, they have a sleep in the middle of the day because it's too hot to do anything. And then they go out late. So it's a completely different the chronobiology is completely different for the day.
yes. But I take what you said before, and I totally agree that health is built on patterns, on
Yes.
rituals. And I think that's important. And consistency is by far more important than intensity.
100%. The goal is never perfection. It's always
Exactly.
consistency.
Yeah.
Consistency is the biggest predictor of health. What are you
Yeah.
doing day in, day out? What are
Yeah.
the things
Yeah.
that are just 100%.
I mean, it's pretty simple, really. Now, I want to change subject, and I want to go to the LGP-1 era, and the GLP-1 medications. Also, take the opportunity of your very recent book, The Appetite Reset, which is what to eat, drink, and thrive, before, during, and after GLP-1 medication. Right. So what? Let's start. What if something excites you about these new medications? Because we see the rise in obesity. We discussed already. The system environment is influencing a lot. Is toxic in a way in this kind of direction. And now the pharma industry has come with a solution: the GLP-1 medications.
Yes.
So, as a clinician and scientist, what's your view?
Yes. So I think pharma industry has come with a medical solution that has to be implemented within a system. So as usual, it's not a silver bullet. It's not a magic medicine. It comes with side effects. It's not effective in all patients, but it is medical revolution. So it's the first time we have a drug that can actually reduce the risk of metabolic health conditions in a really like a big way, Now, so in that sense, I think it is exciting. I think we have a real opportunity now to change the narrative of individual blame, change the narrative of you just have to help yourself, like all of this that's been very unhelpful. But it's an opportunity that if we squander it is a shame. So a lot of the GLP-1 medications, like the science is happening around them, the trials and the patient data has helped us learn new things. We've discovered that food noise in obesity is actually a psychological condition, basically. So there's now a proposed framework, and it is obtrusive thoughts that actually hinder daily life. And before these drugs, there was no like systematic way of recording patients giving this feedback that has now led to us understanding it in a much more nuanced way. It's also thanks to GLP-1s that we now understand hunger and appetite as a chemical, like it's a chemical issue. It's driven by peptides and hormones. It is not driven by your imagination or willpower. So it's opened a lot of doors to understanding physiology and understanding how our food environment is impacting us. The effects are amazing, of course, like especially with the novel dual and triple agonists, you're seeing fat loss and weight loss similar to bariatric surgery, which previously was really the only solution that would give us this amount of fat loss. And there are some exciting data points on cardiovascular health and on inflammatory disease outcomes. The reason I wrote the book is because more than 95% of adults access these drugs without the support framework that is actually part of their prescription. So all the clinical trials, all the guidelines are very clear that these drugs are only safe and effective if they have accompanying psychological, nutritional, and sports support, exercise support. And at the moment, the drugs are too accessible. They're so easy to get on TikTok, Instagram. You just go online, you fill out a form, you never see a clinician face to face, and the prescription arrives in the post. So on one hand, we've got this real medical advancement, like really exciting. On the other hand, it is being misused
Yes.
or people are accessing it in the wrong way. So my book is based on the guidelines, based on the evidence, and it just helps people to navigate why does it work? Because I think for me, if you want to truly be able to use something to its best ability, you've got to understand the mechanisms. So understanding the physiology, understanding how the hormones work, understanding how they can go wrong is half of the book. That's like just a big dive into why it works and what it is. But then these really clear guidelines on what needs to happen with your exercise, with your nutrition primarily. And then I talk about psychological support. Of course, I'm not an exercise physiologist or a psychologist, so I just point to those as resources that need to happen. Because the success of these drugs relies heavily on the nutrition being adequate for these drugs to work. If you take these medications and you have none of that support, there is real risk that you will undernourish yourself and fall into micronutrient deficiencies, that you will suffer with the symptoms that most people suffer with are gastrointestinal symptoms. And they are largely manageable with diet. So it's like you have a worse side effect profile, higher risk of micronutrient deficiency, and a longer term risk, which is, I think, the most worrying risk of sarcopenic obesity. If you end up having to come off these drugs because the side effects are too much, regaining all the fat mass, and ending up with a body composition that's actually worse than when you started. So that, whilst they're incredibly exciting from a science point of view, there's real risk to them being mismanaged. And that's what I'm hopefully trying to help with that. And the book can be one of the tools.
Yes. What do you see from your patients, clients? Do you see that there's a risk of creating long-term dependency?
Well, I think the drugs are actually designed to be lifelong prescriptions, to be honest.
And also psychologically, do you see, okay, I'm taking a GLP-1, I can do what I like, so I can go drink, eat.
Yeah.
You see that?
I interestingly, I did at the beginning. So a couple of years ago with the first batch of patients, they were sort of like, well, I'm taking the drug now, so it doesn't matter what I do. And that quickly changed because you don't feel very good. So if you take these drugs and you don't look after your diet, you will feel pretty rubbish pretty quickly. You will have like the side effects aren't serious, but they're really inconvenient. Reflux, nausea, constipation. These aren't things anyone wants to have all day. So and the alcohol one is very interesting because most of my patients don't want to drink anymore, or they can't tolerate drinking more than a very little amount of alcohol, which is brilliant on one side. And it just goes to show just how powerfully it's acting on the brain. And of course, now there's trials looking specifically at these agonists and addiction. But one thing is for sure, there's like people that come to see me, they're the people who are actually getting the nutrition support. So they're already the minority of people that are accessing these drugs. I think the issue is that people who are accessing these and don't know that they're supposed to change their diet, don't know that there's certain things to look out for, and that if they don't look after their diet, their side effects will be worse and their long-term health could suffer. That's where the real risk is. And, I worry more about those people who don't have access. And these drugs are still quite expensive right now. They're going to come down in price very quickly and they'll be the pill next year. But a lot of people are putting a lot of resource into buying the drugs and then might not have additional resource to get the appropriate support around the drug. And that's where the risk is for me.
You think that somebody, let's say, who wants to lose weight, is taking the drug, is achieving the weight, and then gets off the drug.
Mm-hmm.
Can they keep their weight off, or it will climb up again?
Yeah, so we see this in the patient. So the real world data, about 60% of people stop within a year. So the majority of people stop taking it. And the two main reasons are cost and side effect.
Okay.
And the majority of the people that stop regain 75% of the weight lost within about 6 to 12 months. So the weight regain is real. But it's like any other weight loss intervention, George. Like if you go on a very strict diet, as soon as you come off the diet, your body comes back to the homeostasis, yeah?
Yes.
Your body's like, oh my goodness, we've just survived a famine. Let's replenish all of our energy stores in case there's another famine around the corner. So we know that all these drugs do is the metabolic adaptation that takes place when there is weight loss is the same across any intervention. Your metabolic rate goes down, your hunger goes up. There's all these systems that come into play, and it's why initial weight loss is always easier than long-term weight loss, right? And why caloric restriction in diets doesn't really work in the long term. It's because our body fights us to continue losing weight. It's a danger for our body to wither away. So the only difference with GLP-1s is that plateau point where our body has completely adapted to the new intake is much later. So it takes months, sort of 6 months, 7 months to reach plateau. But their systems are the same. So as soon as you stop taking the drug, that metabolic adaptation is roaring back. Your hunger is super high. Your metabolic rate is really low. And so your body's trying to put the weight back on. And so we do see this. I've worked with like a couple, I'd say about 4 now, patients who have successfully reduced their GLP-1, but really important that you don't just stop. Got to reduce it gradually,
the dose,
and have maintained the weight loss. Now, 2 major caveats with these people. First of all, none of them had been suffering or living with obesity for a very long time. It was a recent event in their lives. So people who had put on weight and become like technically obese with the fat mass they had later in their life. So it was more recent. The second thing is that they really changed their lifestyles during treatment. So their nutrition and their lifestyle completely changed. Sleep.
So we could use the drug to train people, for a window, all right, to change lifestyle, right?
It creates a window of opportunity, but if we don't make the most of it, it's wasted. So there's this really nice window of opportunity where you can help people change their diet, change their lifestyle, address their stress, improve their sleep, and I mean, I'm not going to lie, drastically increase their exercise. So exercise doesn't really help us to lose weight. But when we're talking about weight maintenance, exercise output is very important. So finding a way of moving that you love and that you can definitely continue after treatment stops. That, in my experience, has been the formula for success to maintain the fat loss benefits. And I use the word fat loss because actually these patients were also able to retain their lean mass. They had the very, very consistent, resistant exercise and adequate nutrition that meant that their body composition improved. They lost fat mass, they lost visceral fat mass, and they retained their lean mass. And that's what our goal is. That's what we really want to do.
Yes, I think exercise connects the dots, makes the fat active organ, because for most people it's passive. It just, creates more mitochondria in the muscle.
Yeah.
Changes your mood. So many things that the muscle can do in exercise. And I think that's very, very important. So if I ask you, because we talk about GLP-1 medication, we talk about weight and everything, how would you define ideal weight for somebody? Because you see all these people say, well, when I was 20, I was 65 kilos.
Yeah.
Now, at the age of 50 or 60, I'm 85 and I want to go back to 65 kilos. And of course, it's easy to go down to 65. The big question is, how do you keep it 65? So what can we say to people? What is ideal weight? You have a definition for this?
I actually like to think less about the weight and more about the body composition. really care how much you weigh.
Yeah.
I care much more about how much of that mass is lean mass and how much of that mass is fat mass. So our body weight and our body shape changes throughout our life course.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be like, if a woman is in her late 30s and has had 3 children, I wouldn't expect her shape, body weight to be the same as when she was 18, or her, like the way that her body works, right? So we have to work with um, our changing bodies. I think if we're alive, we've changed, which is a good thing. But body composition can be kept healthy throughout the life course. There are different cutoffs throughout our lives, and it becomes harder to retain lean mass as we get older, as we know. But that's what I would focus more on. Now, okay, when we look at data across populations for body weight, then that's where BMI comes into play. So you can
Yeah.
figure out what optimal BMI is, but even that changes with age. We know that a slightly higher BMI after the age of 70 is protective. And that's usually because it reflects slightly more lean mass, right? So it goes
Yeah.
back to the body composition. But so for an individual, if they're trying to achieve like the healthiest body weight, I would say that it's definitely worth noting if you're gradually putting on weight every month. So if you start to see this creeping up of body weight, it's a good trigger for action. It's like, okay, because we've spoken a lot about homeostasis. We know that our body should be keeping our body weight around the same, like maybe 2 or 3 kilos up and down, but really should be around the same set point. So if you start to see that it is creeping up, that's when you act and you try to understand what's changed and come back to your set point. But for overall health, understanding body composition and functional movement, I think is much more interesting and important. So then there's one more thing I love to, and I've got put this in the book, to understand your metabolic risk related to your health. Knowing your waist to height ratio is so simple and it is so effective. So you just measure your height, or if you don't know your height, measure it with a piece of string. Halve the piece of string, and it should fit around your waist quite comfortably. So if your waist circumference is more than half your height, that tells us that your fat distribution is likely to be more pro-inflammatory, visceral fat, and puts you at higher risk of cardiovascular disease and metabolic disease. So it's not a simple answer. I'm sorry, George, but your ideal weight.
Can we say ideal weight is once you make an effort, ideal weight is the weight you feel energetic, you feel healthy, but it's the weight you can keep forever.
It's the weight that you can keep, exactly. But not forever.
No, not
because
forever.
It'll change. Not forever. Your weight tends to change with age. So okay, from the age of late 20s, I'd say. So the weight. Don't think about how much you weighed
for adult life. Yeah,
adult life. Yeah.
So once you make the effort to go from 80 to 75, and you can keep the 75.
Yeah.
Then that's your ideal weight. But
Yes.
to go from 80 to 65 and you cannot keep the 65, obviously 65 is not your ideal weight.
Yeah.
So once you put the effort, you need to be consistent. Because whatever you do to lose weight, you need to carry on doing.
Exactly. And a lot of people have very unrealistic expectations of weight loss.
Yeah.
And one thing GLP-1s are not helping with is that, because it's driving this very rapid and quite severe weight loss. And actually, for most people, they don't need to lose as much weight as they think they do. It's much more about feeling good, sustaining, and achieving better metabolic health more than the weight.
How early do we set the foundations of long-term metabolic health? When do we begin?
I mean, before birth, before conception. So
our parents.
Yeah. I mean, preconception is a critical time window. If you want to go even further, a lot of the epigenetic changes that we see for obesity are actually transgenerational, so 3 to 4 generations ago. And so depending on which measure, if you're looking at epigenetics or if you're looking at the establishment of the actual metabolic system, but so it's really before us, it's our parents, our grandparents, the uterine environment that our mother was in. It's crazy. There's so much cool science around this. Certainly early life has this really strong effect on our long-term health. So how we're fed as babies, how we're fed as children, how active we are in our childhood, the amount of stress we're under. So like adverse childhood events have very severe impact on long-term health in adults. So but a lot of those, of course, is out of our control as children. So what can we do? What if we're adults and we had not a very good start? Like, how do we work with that? Well, I mean, the good news is that going back to the point you made earlier is as an adult, even if your starting point maybe wasn't as favorable, there are many things you can do that if you do them consistently, then you can have a long and healthy and happy life. But the earlier you start, the more years you have to have impact. But, you know, there was a really elegant analysis that was done using UK Biobank data. And they modeled individuals who had changed their diet at different time points in their life. And men and women who changed their diet aged 40, you know, could expect up to 11 years extra of healthy life. Men and women who changed their life age 70 could still expect an extra 7 years. So it's never too late to start. But I think there is an important piece of awareness that most of us need to have about early life and preconception. And the message is really for anyone who is thinking about becoming a parent or wants to have children. Your health is so important, both mother and father, and we need to take that more seriously. So I think there's a crisis of fertility in the world, and certainly the sort of Western world, and people sort of we need to think about fertility and families differently, because historically fertility rates were higher. You know, sperm motility, sperm quality was vastly better, and women were having children younger. So you had to worry more about not having kids than you did about having kids. Nowadays, that's completely changed. So we need to make sure people understand that if they're thinking of having children, they need to start thinking about it much younger and put things in place to make sure that they can give the next generation the best possible start. And that's, again, that's something I'm very passionate about, because it's almost taboo. So many couples I work with, they feel the pressure to just have a kid and carry on as normal, like as if it's just easy. Yeah. And that we need to change that narrative and say, actually, this is really important. You have to take the time out to focus on what's happening, really prepare for this conception, preconception, and do your best to set yourself up for success and your children up for success. It needs to be much less blasé. It's become it's a very strange space, George. I don't know how much you interact with this population. I work with the IVF clinic at the Portland Hospital here in London. I work closely with Chelsea Westminster pregnancy unit as well. And the narratives are just very odd in the kind of social construct. And I think we need to start to change that. We need to have very honest conversations about it.
And also how you deliver the baby is important, huh?
Yeah.
Let's not forget that as well, because most of the time we go for convenience, but maybe it's not the right way to do.
Well, cesarean sections have grown exponentially, as you know, and don't get me wrong, they save lives. There are times when they are necessary.
Of course they do, yeah.
But
when it's necessary,
you're right.
Yes.
Delivering the baby vaginally is optimal for maternal and child health when it's safe. And how we feed our infants, even more than the delivery.
Yeah, I want to talk about this actually, because I've met a lot of ladies and women, and they're not breastfeeding anymore. and which I think it's a big issue for me.
It is. It's a big issue for
Tell
our
us a little bit
children's.
about this and about also what we should prioritize around the children's nutrition, to help them grow.
So there's, with breastfeeding, it's interesting because again, you see a population level effect. The worst breastfeeding rates in the world are in the UK. So that's one interesting data point. The best breastfeeding rates in the world are in Ghana. Ghana had many years of public health intervention to increase breastfeeding rates. It is completely socially encouraged. Women help each other. There are so many breastfeeding support professionals. And so the entire system is set up to promote breastfeeding for all mothers. Now, in the UK or the US and European countries, it's very different. So in some cases, women might be asked to leave a restaurant or a cafe if they choose to breastfeed their child. It's frowned upon. People think that it's odd that you would breastfeed your baby, right? So there's a real cultural issue with breastfeeding. And many women feel that they're pressured into not breastfeeding because it's seen as the wrong way to do it. Now, we don't have to go into this today, George, but the infant formula industry has had a lot to do with that narrative, right? They like to say, help your partner get involved, let him bottle fill your baby. There's lots of very intrinsically put messaging, fed is best, all these things that mean that women feel that formula feeding is actually the easier option and it's more socially acceptable. It's also because we don't prepare women. So we don't live in transgenerational households so much. So it's some women have never seen breastfeeding happen in their adult lives with anyone close to them. And there is no expectation of what it's going to be like. The fact that in the first few weeks, mothers breastfeed for about 6 to 8 hours a day. It's a full-time job. Again, society isn't set up for that, right? So women are expected to sometimes continue working or to continue providing the majority of childcare for other children whilst also looking after a newborn. So it's preparation. Women don't know what to expect, where to ask for help. They haven't learnt from their aunties or cousins or sisters or in their household. So they come to this brand new with very little support. Breastfeeding support in many countries has been completely slashed. So you don't actually get that support in the hospital anymore. Hospitals are sent hundreds of free formula bottles that they can give new mothers. And unless you ask for your baby not to be given formula, if the baby's taken from you, they will be given formula as the primary route instead of human donor breast milk. I think what we forget is that we've now come to a place where formula is number one, whereas it should be maternal breast milk, human donor breast milk second, because countries like Brazil, if you can't breastfeed your baby for whatever reason, human donor breast milk is there, right? And then third, formula milk, which absolutely has a place. Hundreds and thousands of children wouldn't be alive without it. But its ranking is wrong, right? It shouldn't be the first option. And the effects of breastfeeding on the child do have a long-term impact, and it's primarily through the gut microbiome and immune system. So the gut infant biome is completely new when they're born, and whether they're born by vaginal delivery or cesarean section changes the initial seeding of the gut. And so that's where you can see a difference between cesarean delivered babies and vaginally delivered babies. But it's actually the breast milk that then continues to feed the species and introduce new species that are needed for the baby's health. What do I mean by that? So human breast milk isn't just fat, sugar, protein. That's not all it has. It is an incredibly dense immunological broth. It has cells from the immune system, and it contains bacteria that actually go on to seed in the gut microbiome. And it contains these human milk oligosaccharides, these special prebiotics that preferentially feed the gut microbes that are helpful for infant development. So when you look at human breast milk, it's actually less calories, less fat than formula, right? So it's technically less nutrient dense. But what we're missing is that the human milk oligosaccharides, which we can't digest, the babies don't have the enzymes to break them down, are broken down by the bacteria in the baby's gut, and they produce hundreds of chemicals that support baby's development. So the human breast milk is a unique combination of lots of hundreds of chemicals that changes every day. So your breast milk when your baby is 1 day old is different to a week old, is different to a month old, is different to 6 months. It changes with your baby's development. Not only does it do that, but there are specialized cells in the nipple that pick up a profile from the baby's saliva and feed back information to the glands that changes composition, how fast they eat, how much they cry. It then changes the amount of milk you make and the composition of the milk. Morning breast milk is different to evening breast milk. There's more melatonin in evening breast milk. How cool is that? So there's so much going on. It's a live, active fluid that helps to feed your baby exactly as it should. And the really cool thing about it as well is this immune system effect. So the human breast milk helps to train your baby's immune system as it starts developing. If the mother comes into contact with a virus, like a cold virus, within 2 to 3 hours, the antigens to that virus are in the breast milk to protect the baby. I mean, it's wild, right? So it's not that, I'm sure that formula milk is going to evolve in the next few years, and it's going to become much more complex and have many more of these essential parts of the human breast milk. But at the moment, we're not there. And so to pretend that formula milk is the same as human breast milk is just factually wrong. Now, does that mean that a baby can't grow and thrive and be healthy on formula? Of course not. They can. That's not what we're saying. But there's this misinformation about, oh, human breast milk's not even that great. I was like, okay, that's just a lie. So let's support women who want to breastfeed, should be supported and given the space and the time to actually do it, because any amount of human breast milk is good for a baby. If the mother can't or doesn't want to breastfeed, we should be making human donor breast milk the obvious alternative.
Mm-hmm.
And formula milk is there to help to serve a purpose, and it's there as an option, but it shouldn't be marketed, and it shouldn't be like the amount of confusion that is put out about this is only harmful to women and babies. That's all. It's like a disservice.
You think we fall short in educating mothers, people, parents?
There's like no education on what being a parent looks like or what is best for your baby. And a lot, we know now that over 65% of adults access their health information online. They look for it on the internet. And so we need to make sure that there is reliable sources of information that are giving out the adequate information, the correct information. Otherwise, it's opinions and paid for influencers that are pushing narratives that are, no one's making money off breast milk, George.
Yeah, no, I agree. I want to bring now, you mentioned this AI into our conversation.
Yeah.
Is it helping us to understand better, or what do you think? I always ask this question. I mean, I find it interesting because a lot of people now, they use AI, they become experts. So
yeah, I think AI is going to be helpful overall. I'm quite an optimist. It's definitely some of the AI tools that have been developed for clinicians are so cool. They just very quickly collect guidelines and give one consensus, for example. So there's some cool stuff happening. For patients, I think AI, there's a risk that they think that AI can provide personalized insights. But the issue with that is that clinicians know what questions to ask. So they know if someone says, I've got this strange pain in my abdomen, I don't know what it is, I've had it for 3 weeks. The clinician will know what question to ask next. AI doesn't, right? And this is something that maybe one day AI will learn what the next question should be. But it's often very much a human perception thing. So there's so many data points that clinicians use to know what to ask next or what to investigate next. And it's never the same with two patients, right? So I think it's a useful tool. I think there's lots of risks with it. AI always agrees with you. So if you ask ChatGPT, hey, ChatGPT, is it true that eating more butter is going to be good for my health? It'll find a way of saying yes to you because it wants to agree with you. Okay. So until we have models that are more objective, and I think the future of healthcare will include this. And I think the future of healthcare will also include models that are built on your data. So it'll be personalized. But at the moment, it's just like, it's the same as Dr. Google. So I would say take everything with a pinch of salt and work with a healthcare professional that actually knows you and understands the nuance. I wouldn't take advice on what to do next from AI in the same way that you wouldn't from Google, hopefully.
Well, I think we talk about a lot of things.
Yes.
Just as a closing remark, what in your opinion is, because we talk about hunger, we talk about metabolism, going back again, what do you think is the biggest misconception about hunger and metabolism?
I think the biggest misconception is that for optimal hunger and metabolism, you need to eat as little as possible. In most cases, you're actually not eating enough of the right foods.
Well, Federica, it's been lovely to have you in our podcast, and thank you.
Thank you, George. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for listening. For more, visit Chenot.com. The information in this podcast does not constitute medical advice. Always speak to your doctor or another qualified healthcare professional about your individual needs.